Hey, deserving listeners, let's watch.
Oh my God.
So tell us more. Where are things at today between the two of you?
Yeah, take it away.
So, Meg and I are best friends. Tried dating a couple of times throughout the last year. Ended up in a spot where we kind of both felt like something was off and decided to keep each other in our lives.
Okay, so we're hearing that they're not dating anymore. They tried it and it didn't work out. Okay. And I will commend so far that Mason is giving probably the response that is the most political, the most diplomatic, as a better word, the most careful, the most protective of their privacy, right? Which they deserve. I'm sure, I'm just going to take a guess and say that if Mason were to be honest and safe in talking with his therapist or a friend or something, that there would be some negative things in there. I mean, Meg seems like a good person, but you know, when you break up with when there is a breakup, there's usually something negative that you're going to say, like, I didn't really like this about her, whatever. But he's not saying that, so I want to commend that so far.
Situation from having Meg in my life, and I just don't know what I'd do without you. So
Yeah.
It's Madison.
Hey.
Hi. What did you think of Meg and Mason dating after the pods?
I remember that Alex had texted me that Meg and Mason were starting to date, and he was a little funny about it, but I was like, you know what? I'm really happy for them. That's really cute.
Okay. And Madison is reporting that she is being diplomatic and not interfering or causing any problems. And she is saying, she's mentioning that Alex informed her. That's interesting. So we're learning that they have been communicating more about that. Is Madison accusing Alex of him stirring the pot? I don't know. But this is in contrast to the way she was acting in the pods. Now, this is a year later, but this is also a year later than what she would have learned about them dating. And the pods are particular, and after a couple days, the feelings and the emotions and the hurt or whatever, the concerns would probably die down a little bit. And so, I say all this because if she was consistent with her attitude in the pods and she heard about Meg and Mason dating, she would be really worried about Meg, right? Because he's this pathological liar and he's a clown and a horrible partner, a horrible person. And I guess this is interesting too, that, that Meg would date Mason. I don't know what kind of endorsement that is for what she observed, what Meg observed in him. Yeah. And I think I might have said this at the time, that for Meg, there's a whirlwind of things happening, and she was probably mostly on board with Mason. And then when she heard things from Madison, Mason didn't have a good response. He didn't have an effective story to tell as to why he was leading Meg on later in the 10 days and telling Madison that he's committing to her and then date. That was not okay. We don't assume that Mason was waking up in the morning saying, I want to hurt Meg. There's a lot of more likely reasons. It doesn't mean it's not hurtful. But anyway, I remember thinking at the time that, well, if you're in Meg's shoes, it would make total sense that you would absolutely not want to get engaged to this person, but there's enough there that you would want to date afterwards and, see where it goes.
I thought they deserved each other. Like, I thought they made a much better match than Mason and I did, honestly. I did.
Well, Alex, Mason.
I thought they deserved each other. I don't know what that means. I mean, I don't want to read into it. So her vibe is that she's positive, and so they deserve it. Like I always say, you deserve to take care of yourself. And if you are in a happy relationship, you deserve to be in that too. So I'm going to assume that, because another way of interpreting it is like, well, they're both, so, they deserve each other.
You guys both dated Madison in the pods. What surprised you about watching each other's dates with Madison?
Well, I think it was just,
crazy to see how different she was in the different dates between the two of us. It was almost like two different people in those different pods. So,
okay, so we're going to Alex. I don't know what Alex means by pointing this out. And whenever people are first asked to speak, we have to assume that at least for a bit of time, if not for an entire year, they have been preparing their zinger or their most important thing that they want to say. They would be really silly not to consider what they would want to get into and what they wouldn't want to get into. So that would possibly indicate that Alex thinks that this is some important point. And the way he's wording it is the way that people were saying about her. And can you, as an observation that doesn't have any meaning tied to it, any sort of stigma or slut shaming tied to it, can you say that she was different in her dates in terms of the edit with Mason and with Alex? Yeah. But they're two different guys and they're two different relationships. Alex was quite possibly the most, when Madison and Alex were dating, the two of them were two of the most trauma and, their own issues were very comfortable topics for them to get into. And Alex would ask about it. And it was a central, box that he wanted to check. It was a central deal breaker if people had issues that would trigger him, in terms of what he would say as preoccupation. And so, or his anxious attachment style is his word for it. I use preoccupation because anxious attachment style is too vague to me. That is one of the labels in the clinical literature. There are a number, but I think preoccupied summarizes it the best. I will also use with avoidant. I will say avoidant. Some people say dismissive. There are other words to it. Listen to my deep dive on attachment theory. I actually go over all of the research and literature and all the different labels. And then with disorganized, I use disorganized because sometimes people will say fearful. So isn't that a little confusing that you have in some typology systems, you have anxious attachment and fearful attachment? Well, what's the difference? They're both involving fear. They're just different words for fear. Now, some people will say anxiety is a subset of fear or different, but not really. I mean, even in our clinical field, we'll use the word anxiety for a lot of different things, including just a synonym for fear. Sometimes we're talking about a specific disorder or a specific kind of anxiety. Anyway, so that's why I use that language. But anyway, so he was saying that, so the fact that Mason and Madison, and you could argue that Madison in the beginning, because I rewatched all that stuff, that Madison in the beginning with Mason was actually starting to, and she talked about her traumas, but Mason, although he responded in a somewhat bland but good way, he was like, "Oh, I'm sorry that happened to you," or something like that. But he didn't reciprocate in the edit, and we could imagine that was true in the pods in reality. And he didn't ask questions, and it wasn't a major box that he was trying to investigate. So if anything, she was just adjusting to Mason. And she would say that that's a very important thing. Even before she went into the pods, when they're in that very early phase of the pods, when the hosts come in and say, "You're on Love is Blind," and they're all like, "Yay," that Mason was talking with someone and they're, catching a little clandestine conversation, not secret, but you know what I'm saying. And she's like, "I really want deep conversations. I'm really looking for that. I in the real world, I don't get enough of that." And so, and as a result of that preference, and as a result of the way that she and Alex talked, she was much more happy with Alex and felt way more compatible with him than she ever did with Mason, right? Now, I've been over this already, but the slut shaming involved in the discourse around Madison. And the thing that I have to remember is, one, that my cultural pocket is a pocket and is one of, I have to remind myself that not only is my point of view and the people in my circle, our points of view that we share in this area, not only is it in the minority in the United States, but it's extremely in the minority when you consider around the world. I mean, the United States has sex shame, but my God, now not every country, and there's variations, but other cultures can have extreme sex negativity and extreme slut shaming along these lines. And so, when we talk about the public discourse around an international television show on Netflix, it's just something to think about, right? So I've already commented on this, but the fact that she was, I would argue, mildly sexual with Mason in terms of what we see on the show and also what would be, I think, typical for people in a situation like that. I mean, just, have you ever been on a first date or a third date and you feel the blood pumping and you want to get with it? And, you might not use a lot of words because you're in person. You can talk the language of love with your body. But in the pods, you have to say stuff. You have to, and they were following their blood flow, if you will. There were feelings, and then you talk about it. But to claim that somehow she's this manipulative vixen who is just trying to do things that are going to pull men in or something. Mason was complete. It was a mutual, reciprocal conversation of lust, and Mason was uncomfortable seeming, rewatching that, and he's not a super verbal person. Plus, we don't know that she wasn't doing that with Alex too, and just wasn't in the edit. It's possible that it wasn't, right? But yeah, so Alex is bringing this up. Okay, so regardless of the allegations, if they are true or not, he in all likelihood has the normal human feelings that people would have in a situation like this, where he really liked Madison. He was pretty close to getting engaged, and then he ultimately decided not to, and he would have some residual feelings for Madison. And then when he watches the show, it would bring up a lot of feelings, and he would be watching his ex that he still has some attachment to, which would be normal, flirt or have a connection with Mason. And, that would be hard to watch, particularly if you have preoccupied attachment, now that I think about it, because you have traumas around being abandoned and betrayed. And you would distort that, and it would affect the way you felt, and it would affect your perspective, and you would bring it up at the first chance you could get. Because the other thing is, I believe the reunion was filmed right after the first 6 episodes, or soon after the first 6 episodes, which were the pod episodes, right, were aired. So he would have seen those, and I think they also are given screeners in studio, and they maybe arrive a day early and they watch through the rest of it, or a rough edit, right? Because anyway, so not a rough edit, it would be a full edit because you know what I'm saying. So it'd be a kind of a whirlwind, right? You're just like, well, like if you would have asked Alex prior to watching any of the footage, he might have had a different reaction, as all of them would have, right? Just being fresh, and sometimes we'll see that as just like, watching it back was, and they'll talk about that. So it makes me wonder if they literally were watching it earlier that day or something. I don't know.
Well, I think it was just crazy to see how different she was in the different dates between the two of us. It was almost like two different people in those different pods. So I thought that was the most interesting part. I don't know.
Seeing the contrast of Alex and I was kind of envious that Alex could kind of be a little more cautious, see things for what they were.
Interesting. They're editing it, so we're seeing Mason chime in, but I'm imagining there was a lot more there. And he is, it's interesting what Mason is focusing on, that he is reflecting on himself. He's, I think, basically saying that he still regrets going too fast. And that's interesting because, anyway. So Alex saying that, I don't know if they're going to get into this, but I wonder what Alex was saying. Was he saying the slut-shaming version of that observation, or was he just making an observation, or is that a part of his preoccupation of just like it was just hard to watch her connect with someone else at the very same time that he was connecting with her? I don't know. I think another possibility is that since he probably came to the reunion knowing that the allegations were out there about him, because from my memory, those came out pretty early, that he might want to deflect somehow, or he's worried that Madison's going to come after him for something, and so he wants to discredit her or something. You know, he's one of the first, or he's in the category of people on the couch that right out of the gate, they seem to be or are being critical instead of more kind and diplomatic.
You say seeing things for what they were. What did you not see?
There were things that were said that made me to believe that she was kind of all in on me. Basically, I'm gatekeeping you from all the other girls. I'm only getting ready just to be my best self for your dates. I can't wait for you to take me on vacation to Honduras.
Oh, I spoke too soon. I'm guessing a lot of you were thinking. So he is not, so Mason is, or he's saying both? Let me rewind.
Part, I don't know.
Seeing the contrast of Alex and I was kind of envious that Alex could kind of be a little more cautious, see things for what they were.
You say seeing things for what they were. What did you not see?
There were things that were said that made me to believe that she was kind of all in on me.
Yeah, I take back everything I said, which is fine. You know, sometimes I chime in too early, which you could argue I'm always chiming in a little too early. I don't know. But I will say that I chime in when I have something to say. And also I'm trying to actually include all the little clips that I'm watching, because if I wait too long, then they won't let me upload the video to YouTube, because the copyright has to do with the length of the clips, usually, depending. Also, if there's a published pop song in the show. You know, I discovered that, what's her name? Selena Gomez had a song in one of these episodes, and I didn't know it was Selena Gomez. I don't even know if I knew Selena Gomez was a singer, which I'm going to take a guess and say that that's ridiculous to a lot of you. I've already talked about this, or was I telling my wife? Anyway, either way, let's move forward. So I also am okay with the fact that I will chime in too early at times and jump the gun and misinterpret what they're saying. I'm okay with that. Personally, I don't know if you are, but anyway, because, you know, the overall practice or ethic of being spontaneous and in the moment and having my reaction will occasionally result in that, right? And, you know, there's bigger examples of that where I might react to something and then the next episode something will happen. And so, you know, it's all in that spirit. Anyway, so he is actually saying something that is critical. Mason is saying that, well, so I'm going to take a guess and say that what Mason might be saying in part is that as he's watching, because he just watched that, and on the heels of that, he's in an interesting emotional place, because probably what he remembered was that when he committed to her, to Madison, from his memory, he thought that there was reciprocity. There was enough reason for him to believe that she wanted him to do that and that he was actually following suit, that he was reciprocating, right? It didn't look that way in the edit, and it didn't seem that way in terms of the way she was describing it. She would say to Sarah in the hallway that Mason was the number 2. So this is interesting. It's quite possible that Mason is forgetting. He's misremembering. It's a year earlier, and the whirlwind that is the pods is quite something. So there's that. But it's also possible that something wasn't in the edit. I would suspect that the editors would include these kinds of communications to Mason. And it certainly wasn't the vibe, those 2 dates that they had where Mason was committing. And, you know, and originally it looked like Madison was putting the screws to him. And upon rewatching it, I can still say that I think he would viably feel that way, that she was pressuring him. But that from my perspective, rewatching it, and I think it was a member video, that I saw some justification for where Madison was coming from, for the most part. which was really interesting for me to watch. It's like, oh, I'm now like wondering if this is maybe what Madison was thinking and where she thought where things were going or where things had come from. Anyway, so it's possible that for Mason, at the very least, he might be exaggerating in his memory that because like when I watched the Madison Mason dates in question originally, it very much looked like Madison was saying, you're my number one, and you need to either shit or get off the pot. I want you to tell me or we're done. That, you either commit to me now or we're done. I mean, it wasn't that strong, but that was the strong implication, and that's the way I was interpreting. Having rewatched it, I think there's a other viable scenario. So he could think that's what he was being told, but it was like a comedy of errors in a way. Now, at the time when I reacted, I was thinking that either side, and with this issue, Madison could have been she could have been more explicit, right? And I don't even know what was going through Madison's mind, right? But anyway, so he's criticizing her, which is interesting. All right, well, let's adjourn there for now. Tune in next time when I continue watching if you care to. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.